good to see everyone here. Really thrilled to be here in Montreal. I'm an animal rights lawyer today, and I'm going to talk to you today about some of the work that I do with an organization, Animal Justice, and what we do to try to change the law in this country, make it better for animals, and get us out of the dark ages, because the situation in Canada is pretty bad. I'm not going to bore you with a bunch of legal lingo. In fact, what I hope to leave you with today is actually some really practical ways that you can all be engaged in doing this type of legal work on behalf of animals. Whether you have a law degree or not, there's stuff that we can each be doing to help motivate better laws. So my story begins in Prince Edward Island. I grew up on the East Coast, and some of my earliest memories of caring about animals are seeing images of the commercial seal slaughter on television. And I just remember thinking at the time, you know, how could anyone do that to seals? And I think it woke something within me. I, years later, ended up working for this wonderful woman who some of you may have met or seen her speak before, but she's the leader of the Green Party, Elizabeth May. I worked as her press secretary with her in Ottawa, so right in the thick of all the political work, and I saw how much her law degree helped her every single day in her life. Doing the type of political work and being a leader, it was hugely instrumental, and she was a better activist because of it. So I thought to myself, well, if I want to do something for animals, why don't I try combining the law degree with the animal rights activism and do some animal law? So I went off to law school. Around that same time, I also started getting involved in going to the seal hunt myself, so I saw firsthand what they did to those animals, and it inspired me to do even more and try to embark on this path professionally full-time. Now I lead Animal Justice, which is the only national animal rights law organization in the country. And we do a variety of campaigns and court cases and other initiatives designed to improve our legal system and make it a better one for animals. And I'm going to get pretty soon to some of the reasons why animals have it so bad right now, especially in Canada under our system, compared even to a lot of other countries. But just first, sort of a role of, the role of the law in social change is a really interesting relationship and very well established. And all of the major social change movements that we've seen on this planet, whether it be advocating for greater rights for women, for people of different racial backgrounds or disabilities, all of those communities of people that are disadvantaged, legal strategies have always been a really essential part of that. And so that's why we try to focus on that aspect of the animal rights movement. In 1929, lawyers went to court and argued on behalf of Canadian women that they should be allowed to be appointed to the Senate. It's known as the Persons Case. And the Constitution says that only qualified persons might be appointed to the Senate. And people always thought at that point that that just meant men. And these women are like, nah, we're going to fight this in court. And they won, and that's why women are able to be appointed to the Senate. The gay marriage fight, same-sex marriage battles in Canada and the United States and around the world, there's often a really firm relationship between the court cases that people are bringing and how that drives social change. So you might see a lawsuit filed, and it prompts public discussion, and it pushes people further down the path to thinking that people who are the same sex should be able to get married, and it helps motivate social change. So eventually, one of those court cases might succeed, where a whole bunch of them lose first. But they're all important tools along the way because they prompt public discussion and they get society ready to that place where they're ready for it. And you know, the law is really just a power relationship. We have certain laws because powerful interests want them, and because those interests are motivated to make that change. So when people take power back from the legislators and push that change, that's how we get better legislation. So here's the part where I'm going to kind of depress you a little bit and talk about how bad it is for animals in Canada, but then hopefully give you some reason to be optimistic and tools to engage in the fight to make it better. Let's start with farmed animals. A lot of people are surprised to learn, and even I was, to learn that there is no federal laws governing the treatment of animals on farms in this country. Once they're transported to slaughter, there are laws, and at the slaughterhouse there are regulations, but from the minute that those animals are conceived, born, live their lives, and until they're shipped onto a truck, there's nothing that says how much space they should have, how much socialization they should have, what type of veterinary care they must receive, if they should be in appropriate social groupings. There's nothing. There are rules about transportation, and probably a lot of you know that those are really poor rules right now, and they haven't been updated for about 40 years. There actually is a proposal to amend the transportation laws right now. So some of the problems with them include that you can transport animals for days at a time without food or water or rest. And also you can do that in freezing cold and blistering hot temperatures. So there's no temperature limit on transport conditions. So there's a proposal to change that right now. But what we're seeing is that even there, the chicken industry, the meat industries all have an enormous amount of sway and influence over the content of those new laws. So scientists told the government that you should not be transporting chickens after 12 hours because they start to show really poor signs of welfare. And chickens, whether they're chickens bred for meat or especially chickens who are bred to lay eggs, by the end of their egg-laying life, their bones are so brittle, their bodies are so depleted, and the poor little souls have a really tough time being transported. So the science says you should not transport them more than 12 hours, but the industry didn't like that. So this is an access to information document that we got that shows that the CFIA, which is in charge of this stuff, Canadian Food Inspection Agency, adjusted their proposal and doubled the proposal for 12 hours up to 24 hours to keep the chicken industry happy. So we're seeing here that the industry has more power than us right now. Another area that's unregulated at the federal level is the use of animals in laboratories. And I know a lot of you, being from Montreal, will have heard of the ITR lab that was busted with a CTV expose about a year and a half ago, just revealed horrific things being done to dogs, to pigs, and to primates. And guess what? No one was prosecuted for that. No one was charged because there are no federal laws that apply to those animals. There's sort of a voluntary compliance system that is not law and doesn't give any inspectors any legal authority to do anything for those animals. So again, often a surprise to people because we all assume that things are better than they are. Zoos, once again, no federal regulations for zoos, and it's a patchwork in different provinces. In Ontario, where I now live, I'm from Ottawa these days, there's no requirement whatsoever to get a license to operate a zoo. If I wanted to build a patio in my backyard, I would need a license for that, but I could open up a zoo filled with lions and tigers and bears, and the government would have no way of shutting me or, more likely, some animal abuser down. Our criminal laws, animal cruelty laws is what we traditionally think of them as, are also in a pretty sorry state. So they haven't been updated since the 1950s in any substantial way, and they're still largely unchanged from the 1800s. So it's an offense in this country to cause unnecessary pain, suffering, or injury to an animal. And it doesn't take too long. You don't have to think about that too hard before you realize, well, what does the word unnecessary mean? If you can't cause unnecessary pain or suffering, you can cause necessary pain or suffering. And what the industry says is that all of its uses of animals are necessary. So the meat industry would say it's necessary for people to eat, and so its practices should avoid any criminal law scrutiny. These are just a couple loopholes out of a lot in our federal criminal laws, but another loophole is that you can't willfully neglect an animal. So, sounds okay at first, but you think about that again and you realize that the words willful and the words neglect are polar opposites of each other. So it's a really confusing offense that oftentimes leads judges to make weird legal errors, and oftentimes prosecutors won't want to bring neglect cases under our federal strong criminal code. There have been a lot of attempts to change this, but so far none of them have panned out. This is a member of parliament from Toronto named Nathaniel Erskine Smith, who got elected 3 years ago this week as a Liberal MP. And we actually met him during the campaign and realized that he was vegan. So that was pretty cool. And he won. He immediately wanted to propose an animal cruelty bill, which he did. So he put forward a bill that would have made some common sense improvements to our animal cruelty laws and bring them into the 21st century. So now I'm going to sort of talk about why his bill didn't pass. Unfortunately, spoiler alert, probably a lot of you already know it got voted down pretty handily. And the reason it lost is because the industries right now have more power than us, and they are way better organized than animal activists are. So we need to do what they are doing. Let's talk for a minute about the dairy industry. This is one of the best organized industries, and it also has some of the most money. So the Conservative Party, the federal Conservatives, had a convention in Halifax at the end of August, and somebody from the dairy industry, they had a lot of people there, one of these people left their secret binder, their secret briefing binder before on the convention floor. So now we have a really good idea exactly what their strategies are, and we have sort of a first-hand look into the dairy industry's mind and how it does what it does and how it wields such power over politicians. But these guys, well, first of all, there's a quote in here that a former finance minister said that he would compare the dairy industry lobby's tactics to the U.S. gun lobby, which everyone knows is extremely powerful and basically runs the United States. And that's the comparison that's being made about this industry. So with this one convention, they hosted several receptions where they had members of parliament, they had politicians, they had other decision makers there. They gave them free food, they gave them free booze. They lobbied these people extensively. They had very detailed talking points for how they wanted different motions to go. So the issue for them was that the Conservatives were debating supply management because of the NAFTA renegotiation. And the dairy industry wants to keep supply management because that's a system where they're guaranteed to produce a certain amount and they're guaranteed to get a certain price for that. So it's good for their money, it's good for lining their pockets. But there's a lot of pressure to abandon supply management. So they wanted to keep it, and they had a strategy for how they were going to defeat a bunch of policy resolutions that might have undermined supply management. And in the end, they managed to do that. And one of the reasons is because they can hold receptions like this. My mom, actually, who's here in the audience today, ran for the Green Party first in 2004 in Prince Edward Island. So she likely wasn't going to win the election. She didn't really think she was going to, but the dairy industry still reached out to her and wanted to have a meeting with her, the Green Party candidate, in a place where she's never going to win, to lobby her on supply management. So they are in there at every level and every party and leaving no stone left unturned. Another thing that they're lobbying against heavily right now is the exciting new changes to the Canada Food Guide. So there's a proposal to eliminate the dairy category and emphasize plant protein. So obviously great for human health, great for animals, but not great for the dairy industry's continued existence. So they're lobbying heavily against that. They've set up a website where they're encouraging people to write to politicians and tell them that dairy is an important thing and they support Canadian dairy and so on and so forth. Another thing that they do is they put up bus ads. So maybe some of you saw this a couple years ago, but they had transit ads all across the country on the sides of buses, in transit stops, and subway stations. These advertisements are you can't really see so well on this screen, but they've essentially partnered with the Heart and Stroke Foundation, with the Colorectal Cancer Foundation, and with an osteoporosis organization, so health charities. And they have promoted milk products in partnership with these health charities. And funny enough, the health charities that are designed to address certain diseases, well, dairy actually contributes in a lot of cases to those diseases. So interesting that they have enough money to make this happen. Their marketing budget for the Dairy Farmers of Canada is $80 million alone. And that's actually more than all of the animal rights groups in this country combined, times 10. So these are the opponents that we're up against. So back to this animal cruelty bill that got defeated. The hunters and fishers are also really strongly opposed to any measure that would reform Canada's animal cruelty laws, and they actually put up this website where they put up all the logos of all the various organizations they work with who do hunting and fishing, who are opposing this legislation. And they lobbied the government extensively. So you can see in the federal lobbyist registry who has met with who. And if you look at all the contact between those industries and politicians, I mean, there's just hundreds of meetings. And these people have dozens of lobbyists registered currently right now doing that work every single day. The Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters is one of the most notorious lobby groups in favor of hunting and fishing. And these groups, of course, want to kill any animal cruelty legislation whatsoever, even if it doesn't affect their industries, because they don't want the animal rights movement to gain any foothold. They want to beat us down so that it will never rise to the level where people might start questioning hunting, questioning fishing, questioning farming. So they do that at the early stages. So this is what they did to kill that piece of legislation. It details a number of letters that they wrote to various officials asking them not to support it. And in the end, their strategies worked. So the government actually voted against this piece of legislation. The proponent, Mr. Nathaniel Erskine Smith, himself is a Liberal, but his own government voted against his bill. They wouldn't even let it get to the committee stage where it could be debated and examined because all of these industry interests fear-mongered and threatened them that they wouldn't win the next election if they supported it. So only 84 MPs voted in favor of this legislation and 198 voted against it. So we got ourselves outvoted on this one big time. Okay, so that's the political context that we're living in right now. These industries are much more powerful than we are. And we need to change that. And pretty soon I'm going to get to some tips on how we can all play a role in doing that. Some of the other important work that animal justice and other organizations is doing these days involves not just the court of public opinion and political work, but also the actual court, so going in and fighting court battles. In 2015, so 3 years ago, we fought at the Supreme Court in a case that would have opened up a loophole that would allow people to engage in bestiality without that being illegal. And unfortunately, the court did find that there's a bestiality loophole in this country. My colleague Peter Sankoff there intervened in this case for us, and we made the point that courts have to start considering animal protection when they're deciding these cases, and the interests of the animals have to be inserted in there. So we want to make sure that people in powerful positions in courts hear that there's an argument that animals have to be taken seriously. We need to insert that into the dialogue. And although the case eventually, it didn't go the way we wanted it exactly to, the Supreme Court still recognized for the very first time that animals and protecting them is a fundamental society value in this country. So that's still a huge deal. Even if the court case didn't go the right way, this makes a big difference. And actually, just to follow up on this whole issue, so this case said that most bestiality is not illegal. On Thursday, the government finally tabled a piece of legislation that would close that loophole and outlaw all bestiality, so that's happening now. We're disappointed that they didn't do more to address all the other problems with our animal cruelty laws, but it definitely is something. And that only happened after 2.5, 3 years of lobbying and of publicity on this issue. Another thing that we did recently, this is one of my favorite cases because I think it really does show the difference that public opinion and that people like you can have make in a legal proceeding even if you're not a lawyer directly involved in the case. This is a woman named Beth Richardson. She's a police officer just outside Toronto, and a couple years ago she rescued a kitten from the home of somebody who was on methamphetamine. So she showed up on this call to check on the person's well-being. And it was a really bad situation. The kitten appeared scared. There was a woman who was on drugs. There were other people using drugs in the unit. So she took this kitten named Tia out of the situation to get her some veterinary care and make sure she was taken after. Her higher-ups didn't like this, and they started a prosecution against her for disreputable conduct. So that means conduct that would bring the police into disrepute in the eyes of the public, which it's kind of funny since most people look at this case and say, well, that woman's a hero, she should get a medal, and wouldn't find that to be disreputable at all. So it became a kind of a firestorm. It became a really big case. We decided to try to intervene in it to make the point that animals are just as deserving of the police's assistance as humans are. And what ended up happening is it became such a media circus. There were so many cameras outside the hearing this day that we walked in, and before we even had to argue about whether animal justice had the right to be there to help her out, the prosecutors came to us and they said, okay, let's just sort something out here. We'll just make this go away, because they did not want that extra negative publicity for the police. And the deal that we worked out is a statement where they backed off a little bit, and they said that police actually have a duty to protect animals just as they have a duty to protect humans. And that didn't happen just because animal justice showed up. That happened because everyone came together as a community and said really loudly and clearly in the media, on Facebook, on social media, that this is unacceptable and that that can't happen. That was public pressure brought to bear that made the difference in that case. And another prominent case where public pressure made all the difference, I'm sure a lot of you recognize this image, but that's a woman named Anita Crimes, who is the founder of the Save movement in Toronto. And Anita, of course, stands outside slaughterhouses doing vigils with other activists, and they give water to pigs when they're thirsty, because of course, as we've discussed, Canada has the worst transport laws in the Western world. And oftentimes on hot days, these pigs arrive at slaughterhouses just completely depleted because they haven't consumed water in days. So these brave activists do give them water, and of course one day she had the police show up at her house, and after a trucker made a complaint, and she was charged with criminal mischief for her supposed crime of giving water to thirsty pigs. So as we all know, there's no surprise here what happened. It became just a media gong show, I believe is the technical term. It was getting international press just all around the world. And everyone was just so outraged that a woman who did something selfless and brave and heroic was being prosecuted for the supposed crime of helping an animal. This is the day that Anita got acquitted. I was actually there that day. It was pretty triumphant and exciting, and the judge said pretty clearly that the offensive mischief was definitely not made out in this case. So that was a legal victory, but it was also a public moral victory because there were so many people that showed up to support her at every stage of the way in this trial, and it provoked such public outrage and conversations and discussions that the meat industry shot themselves in the foot by pushing for this prosecution because it further entrenched the idea in people's mind that maybe what we're doing to animals just isn't right, that maybe it's not okay to be putting them on these trucks and shipping them to slaughter and depriving them of water. So Anita was acquitted, and it was a legal victory, but it was also a moral victory and a public victory that put the issues on the public's radar. All right, so now I'm going to get to the part where we talk about practical ways each of you can play a role in doing this work, in creating public opinion and shifting public opinion and translating that into better laws so that Canada can move out of our status as the country with the worst animal protection laws in the Western world. So back to the dairy industry for a minute. The reason that they have so many dairy-friendly policies and that they get billions in subsidies every year, it's not because dairy is like a super popular product. On the contrary, dairy consumption is declining. But these guys are very well organized and they have a lot of money. We may not have that much money, but we can get better organized, and that's exactly what we need to do. So here are some ways to get political just like they do, and we can beat them at their own game. We all need to be, in addition to all the great activism that people are doing through street outreach, Anonymous for the Voiceless, protests, DXE, all the other amazing work, I really hope that we can incorporate political lobbying into our activism. Just make that an everyday part of the work that we all do. So the first thing you want to do is build a relationship with your political representatives. They listen to people who contact them and support them and try to sway them. And it may seem futile, but it's actually not. If enough people in any one riding are telling a member of parliament or an MNA or a city councillor that they want to see a change, it starts to get hard to ignore. So I encourage everyone to build a relationship with your local representatives at all levels of government. The first thing you can do that's really easy is just emailing them. If there's an issue that comes up where you think that they need to hear from you on an animal issue, drop them a note. The next best thing, actually a better thing you can do, is to phone them because they do pay even greater attention to phone calls. They keep lists and they track very carefully how many people call in about different issues, and they help decide how they're going to vote based on that. Meeting with them is even better. It's actually not that difficult to get a meeting with your representative. You just have to ask, and sometimes you need to be a little bit persistent. But if they can put a face to your name and identify you as a credible, normal person in their riding who wants to see action on this issue, even better. You can also attend town halls and community events. They often have just open nights where you can come and discuss an issue with your MPs. So contact their office and find out if they have anything like that. The next thing you can do after you've built a relationship is you could consider joining a political party to push positive animal-friendly policies from within. And maybe you feel strongly about a party already. That's great. You can go join that party, or maybe not. You might want to join a party just for the purpose of trying to get animal issues on their radar. It does make a difference because they have policy conventions. They have local policy discussions at the riding level where they decide what position they're going to take on issues. And just having one animal-friendly voice in there can sometimes completely shift the balance of that discussion. Even better, you can vote for animal-friendly candidates in elections, and this is obviously super important. Research the positions that animal candidates, or that the candidates have in your riding. Call their campaign offices, email them, meet them on the doorstep if they're canvassing in your riding, and tell them that you vote based on animal issues and ask them what they're going to do to get your support. And it's so important because oftentimes people in our position feel like, well, they're never going to do anything anyway. But of course they won't if we don't ask them to. So vote for animal-friendly candidates. I should note that that worked out really well here recently in Montreal. You've got a great new mayor who's already made some amazingly positive changes for animals. And the Montreal SPCA, lots of other animal advocacy groups were very engaged in helping Valérie Plante win. And it is paying off so far. So that alone just shows the difference that can be made. You can also volunteer for animal-friendly candidates. That's even better than voting for them. They will remember the people who helped them get there. And I can tell you, I've run for office myself. I know many members of parliament. The people who volunteer for them during campaigns, they remember who helped them get there. So if you go out and knock on doors with a candidate, if you help them put up signs, if you show up to their debates and cheer them on, It's going to be much easier to get a meeting with them after they're elected, and they're going to feel beholden to you, which is great because now you have some power over them, and you can use that power for animals. And of course, you can donate to them as well. They all need, tens of thousands of dollars, sometimes up to $100,000 just to run an election campaign. It's a very expensive proposition, and they will remember who shows up and supports them financially. And finally, you can run for office yourself. We need more animal-friendly candidates in there. The amazing animal cruelty bill that Nathaniel Erskine Smith put forward, it was motivated by his own personal concern for animals. As somebody who is a vegan, he knew that these issues needed to be taken seriously. So we need more vegans, we need more vegetarians, we need more animal advocates elected at all levels of government. So Humane Voters Canada is a side project that Animal Justice has where we get involved and engaged in all of this stuff that we've just been talking about, especially during elections. So we go out and we knock on doors. We try to help drive support towards animal-friendly candidates and even defeat candidates who are not friendly to animals and vote against animal protection legislation. So please consider getting involved next election. But we endorsed Nathaniel Erskine Smith, and that was, of course, one reason he put this legislation forward. That's our volunteers canvassing for him 3 years ago in the last election that he ultimately won. So it makes a difference. So how do you find your member of parliament? It's actually super easy. Feel free to take photos of this if you want, but if you visit Parliament's website, it's parl.gc.ca, you can search using your postal code to find out who represents you. Next thing you want to do is phone or email the constituency office. Ask to speak probably with staff at first, explain what you want to meet about and who you are. Let them know you're a local person, you're a credible person, and you just want to meet about animals and come off as reasonable. And then a good time to have a meeting is a weekend if they're back in the riding, or during the week when Parliament's not sitting. So oftentimes they have break weeks, like the week of Thanksgiving is always a break week, often Remembrance Day, Christmas break, there's tons of break weeks in. So find the right week when they're actually in your community and not in Ottawa. You want to choose 1 to 2 issues. I know there's a lot of animal issues that we all care about, but it's best not to overwhelm them at first, but maybe choose something that is currently in the news, like a bill that you want them to support. Educate yourself about it so you can be the best representative for the animals that you can. I know we all think of MPs and other representatives as being sort of all-powerful and knowing all the issues, but I can tell you they don't. And oftentimes just learning about it from their constituents can push them in the right direction. Can't tell you how many times I've met with MPs who just have no idea that we have terrible transport laws, for example. So you ask them if you want them to vote for a bill, vote against a bill, raise an issue in their Liberal or NDP or Conservative or whatever caucus meeting, or help convince colleagues or leadership to support your issue. And then the key thing is to follow up with them later. It's not enough just to have that one meeting. You need to stay on them so that they know this is an ongoing issue of concern for you and for others. And keep repeating this as often as you can. If you can encourage others who live in your community to do the same, that's even better, because one meeting with one person is great. If they're hearing from a second constituent on this, or a third or a fourth who care about animals, then that's going to help push them too. So a couple current pieces of legislation that you can meet on right now, you can lobby on right now. There's a bill to ban shark finning that's still in the Senate. That's Bill S-238, and it's kind of stalled right now, but we hope it will go forward, and there's a lot of support for it. So meet with your member of parliament. Tell them that you support this legislation. Bill S-203, ending the captivity of whales and dolphins. This would ban places like Vancouver Aquarium and Marineland from confining sensitive cetaceans in tiny concrete tanks. Also stalled in the Senate. What you need to do here is call the Conservative Party leader Andrew Scheer and tell him to let that bill pass through and get to a vote. And I'm just about to wrap up here, but it does make a difference. So the Conservatives in the Senate tried to kill the whale and dolphin bill previously, and people wrote in, sent so many emails of outrage about this that it swamped the Senate email server, and let me assure you that did not go unnoticed, and it saved the legislation. So citizen advocacy can make all the difference. And then the final one is the Cruelty-Free Cosmetics Act. This is now in the House of Commons, so meet with your MP, speak with them, lobby with them on that. There's support from all 4 parties for these issues. These are MPs from all 4 parties, so don't worry about who represents you. Just make sure you get in there and you have that meeting. Okay, so I think that's my time, and I think that's good.